The list of works of the flesh in Galatians 5 in the King James Version contains several subtle false friends: variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies. Let's talk through several. So here we are in Galatians 5, and on the right I have the King James Version, on the left I have the English Standard Version. The King James reads in this whole verse, verse 20, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies. I'm going to focus on just the words that I've mentioned, and I'm going to try to go quick. Hang on. Variance. Variance to me just doesn't sound right in a list of sins. It's not a word that in my contemporary English carries a lot of moral overtones. It's a technical word, so there's a contextual conflict in my mind. I'm expecting this to be a sin because it's in a list of the works of the flesh, which goes back to Galatians 5:19. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, and then it lists adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, etc. And then after verse 20 goes on, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings. So I expect variance to be a sin, but I've just never heard anyone in real life mention the sin of quote-unquote variance. Likewise with emulations. I thought that emulating somebody is good, like when I emulate a wise older pastor that I respect. I've never heard anyone outside the King James Version call emulation a sin, or use the word emulations in the plural. Something else is going on here. Wrath, I don't think is a false friend. Pretty sure they were using the word the same way we are. Strife, that seems to fit here too, though I notice that other translations, like the English Standard Version, go with rivalries, so maybe there's a false friend here. I need to see whether the Oxford English Dictionary gives strife a sense that we don't use anymore. Then this word seditions. In our English, this is a very particular word. It refers, at least in my experience, to political intrigue in the halls of government, trying to bring the government down. I've never heard it referred to as a sin in church, unless maybe there are some deacons who get together secretly to undermine the pastor. I don't know. This is a potential false friend. Then heresies, the last in verse 20, is definitely a contemporary English word, but today's translations go with divisions here pretty reliably. So I wonder again if we've got a false friend. So we've noticed some possible false friends. Let's jump to step 2, looking up the underlying Hebrew or Greek word in a responsible original language lexicon. The very first word, variance, only gets used in the King James at this one time. Elsewhere, it's more often translated strife, or even debate, and apparently 2 times also contentions. And when I look it up in BDAG, Bauer, Donker, Art, and Gingrich, I'm not seeing the word variance. I see strife, discord, and contention. I don't see variance listed among any of the many lexicons I have, even though some of them go back in time into the 19th century. So I do think I've probably got a false friend here. We just don't use the word variance the way the King James translators did. Next word is emulations, and that is zelos. That can be a good thing. Zeal for your house has consumed me. That's John 2:17. There can be a holy jealousy. The spirit lusteth to envy. The King James says elsewhere. Yearns jealously for us. That's a good thing. But this isn't a list of sins, so I'm expecting something negative. And again, I don't see emulations anywhere. Is it popping up? No, all I see is envy, jealousy, and resentment. So probably, yes, a false friend. On to the word strife, which the ESV translated rivalries, and that's the kind of thing I'm seeing here in the lexicons. Selfish ambition. But the word strife is listed in BDAG, and so we probably don't have a false friend. Next, the word seditions. The original language lexicons are giving dissension, and LSJ, Little Scott Jones, which goes back into the 19th century, does give the word sedition. So does Lust, Einikel, and Houseby, the Septuagint lexicon. So maybe there's a contemporary use of the word sedition that I'm just not familiar with. We'll have to check that in the next step. But dissension certainly makes more sense to me, and that's what BDAG goes with. Okay, last we've got the word heresies, which is the word hairesis in Greek. And I already happen to know that this word can mean a sect rather than necessarily a false teaching. The question is, what did it mean to the King James translators when they said heresies? And that will have to await the English dictionary steps, to which we will now turn. Third step is looking up the King James word in a contemporary dictionary, which I've already done here in Merriam-Webster. We're going to discover some more evidence to see if we have false friends. Variance means the fact, quality, or state of being variable or variant. Difference, variation. Yearly variance in crops. Yes, that is exactly how I've used the word and heard the word used. The fact or state of being in disagreement, a dissension, or a dispute. Boy, I mean, yeah, here's the contemporary dictionary telling me that if I were really smart, I would have heard the word used this way, but I'm skeptical. I speak English, and I think this probably should say archaic on it. I just never heard people use the word that way. Maybe I'm wrong. Emulation. Ambition or endeavor to equal or excel others as in achievement. I can't say I've heard the word used quite that way. To me, it's this second sense, imitation. Or, I have heard it in an emulator. I used to run an emulator on my Mac that emulated running Windows. But this has to be the sense that the King James translators were using. And here's a case where a contemporary dictionary actually shows me that older sense. It marks it as obsolete, ambitious or envious rivalry. That's got to be it. That's got to be it. We do have a false friend here, especially if the OED backs me up here. Strife we already know that word. I don't think earnest endeavor is what's going on here in the list of the works of the flesh. So, yeah, again, I'm thinking we probably don't have a false friend there. Sedition is the incitement of resistance to or insurrection against lawful authority. That is not what the original language lexicons were saying this word means. Let's go back to that one real quick. That was this word. Where did it go? Yeah, here we go. Even though the word sedition was listed among some of these, if we actually look at the definition in Bauer, Donker, Arndt, and Gingrich, we get kind of an explanation. The state of being in factious opposition, dissension. So yeah, that's related to sedition. Sedition does that, but sedition in contemporary English is the incitement of resistance to or insurrection against lawful authority. I think we've got a false friend here. We'll have to check the OED. That's the last step, but I see some disparity here. Then heresies. It definitely in contemporary English means adherence to a religious opinion that's contrary to church dogma. They were accused of heresy. This is a big deal. It's not just being wrong about something minor. It's being wrong about something major. Now let's move on to step number 4 and check the Oxford English Dictionary. I've gone to the trouble of looking these words up already. Let's go right through them again. Thank you for staying with me here. Variance. This has senses that we still use for sure that go back a long time. The fact or state of undergoing change or alteration, being different. Yeah, I sense that. We've had that. We have that sense in contemporary English. But if you look down here at sense, where did it go? Sense 6, that's right. I looked through this before and I thought, yes, this is what I'm seeing in the King James Version. The state or fact of disagreeing or falling out, discord, dissension, contention, and debate. Now, the OED does not mark this as obsolete. I'm not sure if this entry has been revised since the late 1800s. I'd have to check on that. But I'm just not feeling it. I've never heard the word used this way. I think we've definitely got a false friend here because this is the sense of the Greek word. This has to be what it means in the King James Version. That sense goes back a long time. I just don't think we have that sense anymore. And the contemporary dictionary that I used earlier bore that out, right? No, it didn't. Oh, yeah, it had this. I'm sorry, I'm just not feeling it. I have never heard anyone use the word this way before. So, I think I know English pretty well. Again, maybe I'm wrong, but I think my gut says we have a false friend here. Can't be absolutely certain because maybe better educated people than me know this word. Emulation, let's move on to that. The endeavor to equal or surpass others in any achievement or quality. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and definitely I have heard the word used that way. But this way, ambitious rivalry for power or honors, contention or ill will between rivals, that has to be what the King James translators meant, and this is marked as obsolete. Aha, we definitely got a false friend here. Let's move on to strife. I think we already concluded that this is not a false friend, and sure enough, the OED has the very same sense that the contemporary English language dictionaries do. And then we go to sedition, violent party strife, factious contest attended with rioting and disorder. That's obsolete. I don't think that's the sense we're going for here in the King James Version. I think this is probably, no, that's not right. Sense 3 is of inanimate things, so that doesn't fit either. 2b is what I understand the word to mean today, conduct or language inciting to rebellion against the constituted authority in a state. So I guess we are back to sense 1. This probably is what the King James translators meant. If this is all the senses there are, then violent party strife is the sin that gets named in the Greek and sure fits the context, which we'll talk about more in just a second. And this is marked as obsolete. So sure enough, we have a false friend here. That sense is not available in contemporary English according to the OED. Lastly, heresy. This gets a little complicated. Because in English, it can mean theological or religious opinion maintained in opposition to the orthodox doctrine of the Christian church. Certainly can. But even in English, we have this sense, in the sense of the Greek word hieresis, opinion or doctrine characterizing particular individuals or parties, a school of thought, a sect. It's sectarianism that this Greek word can be talking about, which doesn't focus so much on the opinion that is being held as in the divisiveness with which that opinion is held. So you can be divisive and have a sect about something that's good or true, or something that isn't, against Orthodox doctrine per se. You can be divisive about paedobaptism and credo baptism. You can make a big stink about it and try to cause fights about it, or about Bible translations, let's say. The question is, when Paul used this word in Greek, did he mean doctrine that's deeply, deeply opposed to Orthodox Christian doctrine? That's possible. Or did he mean sectarianism? And I said I was going to say another word about that. What I find so interesting about this passage is that even just recently looking through it, I was trying to summarize it for sixth graders as I wrote a biblical worldview textbook for BJU Press, which is going to come out, Lord willing, in the next year or so. It was such a joy, and I was trying to summarize these works of the flesh, and I was trying to categorize them. And I noticed, as I was not surprised, that sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, these are all mentioned. Here's the King James on the right, and let me point to it instead. Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, and lasciviousness. I'm not surprised to see 1, 2, 3, 4, and then where's another one? Maybe revelings is also sexual. It's hard to know, but have to look that one up. I'm not surprised to see sexual sin in that list. But you count up the sexual sins, 4 or 5, and then I noticed as I was trying to categorize these that if you count up variance, emulations, maybe wrath, but certainly strife, seditions, and heresies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, maybe 7 if you add envyings, we've got this other category. They're all talking about contentiousness, divisiveness, division, sectarianism, unnecessary, unjustified separation. If I am separating from my brothers in Christ over something that the Bible doesn't teach, then I'm guilty of these sins, which get at least equal attention to sexual sin in this list of the works of the flesh. I look out to the contemporary church landscape and I see divisions that ought to be there, divisions over what the gospel is, divisions over baptism that ought to be there in the sense that if you believe, as I do, that only believers should be baptized, then I can't practically be in a church with somebody who baptizes babies. I can respect and love them, I'm not going to be divisive or angry toward them. But that's a division that ought to exist, and we can do it with mutual respect. There are also divisions where where I don't have respect. People who are mainline liberal Protestants who deny the Bible's authority and deny the gospel. I have no respect for that division. I would stand up against it. But then there are these other issues where people cause big fights, again, like Bible translation. Is it really worth the division and strife and variance and emulations and seditions and heresies, the rivalry, the selfish ambition, the dissension, the contention? Is that issue worth all of this that I do see out there on the internet and in real life? I don't think so. I don't think so. You've looked at the mechanics of Bible translation with me in these videos. Good people can differ over how best to translate things into contemporary English. That shouldn't cause people to claim that others are involved in heresy. It shouldn't cause division at all. I think that's the upshot for me when doing this study. I want to know what the Bible means, and I think I do now. I think that the King James Version, through no fault of its own, but only because of language change, is somewhat misleading or, at best kind of opaque. What are emulations? What is variance? I didn't know. Now I looked it up and I do know. And I think that these words, insofar as people know their contemporary use, are misleading. They don't mean today, in a context like this one, without a whole lot of context, telling you what these words mean. You just know that they're sins, that's all. I don't think that these words communicate accurately today. As they did in 1611, apparently, quite apparently, the OED says so, like words like this. So let's read it in the ESV. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions. You can understand that, can't you? That's what Paul is warning against, and hopefully this video on false friends has been helpful to you in understanding your King James Version better.